Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you all, and welcome to the second episode of the exciting topic of Islam and natural philosophy with Dr. Basil AlTaie. Dr. Basil, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I am fine, thank you. I'm doing well.
Alhamdulillah. And today we are going to talk about the revival of Kalam. After we have learned in the last episode an introduction to what is Kalam and its different schools and what's Daqiq and what's Jalil, what happened to eventually lead Kalam to be banned from Islamic discourse, and then the revival of Kalam, and he's going to talk to us. Why do we need this? And we're going to discuss that, and also the contemporary formation of Kalam. What can we take from Kalam today in this age to really benefit both on our cultural roots and on our entrenchment and understanding to science? So, Dr. Basil, very excited to listen to what you have to teach us today. So, the stage is yours, sir.
Thank you, Ahmed. Today I would be talking about several subjects in this field. Again, it falls actually within the historic background of the subject of Kalam in general. As I said briefly in the previous episode, the methodology of Kalam is different from the methodology of the philosophers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, most Muslim philosophers try to accommodate the Greek philosophical trends within the Islamic worldview.
Mm-hmm.
This reconciliatory approach was started by Al-Kindi, who died, the philosopher. He's half philosopher, half mutakallim, actually. Many people ask me from time to time, they send me messages, is Al-Kindi a mutakallim or philosopher? He's half philosopher, half mutakallim. He died in 868. That's the 9th century. And this approach was further developed by Al-Farabi, died 950, well-known philosopher, and Avicenna, Ibn Sina, who died 1036. By the way, these are not Persian philosophers. Al-Kindi is Arabic philosopher. I mean, I say that to give the right attribute to the people. And Farabi is Turkish, and Ibn Sina is from Khawarizm. This trend of reconciliatory trend was followed by almost all Muslim philosophers, including Averroes, Ibn Rushd. Rushd died 1198. And he wrote a famous book, Tahafut Al-Tahafut, trying to answer questions raised by Al-Ghazali. Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali was also not a mutakallim, not a philosopher. Al-Ghazali is an identity, and he is a great mind, great mind, a great thinker, as we will see later in other episodes.
So he is a type of his own.
Exactly. Al-Ghazali tried to show the loopholes in the philosophical arguments and why it leads to atheism. Philosophical arguments will not
very smart. So he raised the red flag very early.
And he wrote the incoherence of the philosophy. Ibn Rushd, about 70 years later, wrote the book of the incoherence of incoherence, Tahafut. In his book, Fasl al-Maqal, the decisive treatise, Averroes strove violently to show that Islam can accommodate the views of Greek philosophy through what? Through reinterpretations of the verses of the Quran.
So completely contrary to the approach of the mutakallimun, who actually use the Quran as inspiration. They don't try to fit it in
I
the
hope
Greek.
so, but
Yeah.
why should we
Yeah.
go into reinterpreting the Quran?
Hmm.
By the way, there is a verse in the Quran which says nobody knows the full, the most accurate interpretation of the Quran except God.
No.
And those knowledgeable people say, we believe in it as it is because it is the revelation of God.
وما يعلم تأويله إلا الله والراسخون في العلم
والراسخون في
يقولون
العلم
آمنا به.
يقولون
No.
آمنا به كل من عند ربنا.
No.
Ibn Rushd says,
Hmm.
we read it like this:
Hmm.
وما يعلم تأويله إلا الله والراسخون في العلم.
Mhm.
يقولون آمنا به. Who is يقولون آمنا به? I don't know. In that
Hmm.
case, it is. I mean, he tries to, deviate from the actual meaning, Arabic meaning.
Hmm. And then يقولون will not have the subject, you
Will,
mean?
will, will not be connected. يقولون
Yeah.
آمنا به. They
No.
say we. Who says
No.
تأويله is different from تفسيره, by the way.
Yeah.
تأويله something else.
Yeah.
It's deeper, much deeper.
Yeah.
تأويله, to know all the knowledge, all science in details, then you can interpret the Quran properly. But
Yes.
by the way, this is not only interpretation, it is origination. تأويله. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here is that I mentioned this to show there
Hmm.
is a very, very accurate, very important difference between the philosophical approach and the Kalam approach. Yet this defense ultimately proved unsuccessful. I mean, defense of Ibn Rushd,
Mhm.
what philosophers and philosophy, was unsuccessful. Ghazali already strong evidence,
Hmm.
strong enough, and very effective in persuading the elite of the inadequacy of the philosophy.
Hmm.
Nowadays, some writers claims that Al-Ghazali was the reason for the decline of Islamic civilization.
Really?
Yeah, this is all nonsense. Like
Hmm.
Tyson, director of the planetarium of New York.
Yeah, yeah. Neil deGrasse Tyson. Yeah. Tyson.
Exactly.
Hmm.
He claims that without knowing, without reading Al-Ghazali, he have heard from somebody perhaps, or that Al-Ghazali considers mathematics the work of devil.
Okay.
There is
Wow.
no such thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some of the mutakallimun who lived during the 11th century and later, especially those whose alliance was still with the Mu'tazili, for example, borrowed some of the philosophical arguments in their endeavor to support the proof of the existence of God and
Mhm.
to coherently theorize his attributes. So this is a connection between Kalam, but this comes late. And here I should remind my audience and yourself with one important thing. The mutakallimun are actually divided into two big generations. The early mutakallimun,
Mhm.
which were which appeared during the 8th, ninth, and 10th century,
All
perhaps the
right.
11th century. 11th century, yes. Well, no, the 10th century. And then you have later the late mutakallimun, they are called.
Mhm.
The original mutakallimun were pure. They didn't mix with philosophical arguments. They
Uh-huh.
presented their own methodology and argument. The late mutakallimun started with Al-Fakhr al-Razi. They borrowed some of that's what I mean, during the 11th century. They borrowed some of the arguments of philosophy. عضد الدين
Right.
الإيجي, for example, التفتزاني, نسفي,
Hmm.
they all borrowed philosophical arguments because I will show later
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
Kalam principles were not reasonable sometimes. It
Hmm.
looked non-reasonable because the knowledge at that time
Hmm.
were different from the knowledge at our time.
Aha.
And
I see.
I should point to one important thing.
Hmm.
If you ask a physicist, a scientist, a
Uh-huh.
physicist,
Uh-huh.
and present Daqiq Al Kalam to him before the first few years of the 20th century,
Ah.
he will say you are telling me nonsense.
Ah.
These
Because.
principles of
Yeah.
Kalam, which I
Hmm.
will talk about in the next 8 episodes, are
Mm-hmm.
nonsense.
Hmm.
Atomism, indeterminism, these are nonsense. The world is deterministic. The world is continuous, not discrete. The
The
world
world
is
is static.
eternal,
Yeah.
eternal.
Eternal and static and everything.
It's only in the 20th century that we came to know that the world has a start,
Yeah.
that the world is atomic, that the indeterminism is prevailing law of nature, and I will explain that later. But before 1900, we couldn't say Kalam and Kalam principles means have any position in science or scientific knowledge.
I see. So it was not reasonable to the philosopher at that age because the
Exactly.
science of that age was so less developed to completely appreciate the jewels of the Daqiq Al-Kalam, let's say.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
during the century, the 8th century, the 9th century, Kalam was actually Caliph al-Mamun
Mm-hmm.
fostered the Mu'tazilis. Caliph al-Mamun died 833, and he was
Uh-huh.
young when he died, already 45 years or so old. So he is from the 9th century. He fostered the Mu'tazilis and enforced their views in Jalil al-Kalam especially, upon the religious clerics.
Okay.
This action resulted in much agony and social unrest among Muslims. Some of the famous clerics, like Ahmed ibn Hanbal, were
Mm-hmm.
jailed and tortured. Others, like Shafi'i, escaped to Egypt to find safe haven.
Subhanallah.
Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
anyway, some of the famous clerics, as I said, of Ahmad ibn Hanbal is a great cleric, to be tortured, etc. This was wrong. It
Yeah.
was wrong.
Of course.
It was wrong
Of course.
to enforce the ideas of mutakallimun or kalam, of especially of the Mu'tazilis on people. And Al-Mutawakkil, who died in 861, changed the philosophy, the policy, changed the official policy, and he said we should discard the Mu'tazilis, and he released Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Since then, Mu'tazilis were weakened. That is, let us go back. It is in 860 something, 60s.
Uh-huh.
In about 150 years later, the Abbasid Caliph, inspired actually by the Hanbali ideas, Al-Qadir, Al-Qadir Billah actually, who died in 1031, issued a decree. It's called
Mm-hmm.
Sahifa Al-Qadiriyya or Risalat Al-Qadiriyya, which for the first time explicitly formulated Sunni doctrines. The decree condemned Mu'tazilis,
Mm-hmm.
clearly, and even Ash'aris.
Okay, so both sides. He says nobody talks about this anymore.
Yes, and
Mm,
affirmed the veneration of the first four caliphs, Rashidun,
mm-hmm,
and the companion of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He affirmed that this is the right track that every Muslim should follow. So let's do without kalam anything. In fact, not only let's do without kalam, but the wrong thing is to prevent kalam and kalam debates. On the other hand, if you look at what was going there at that time, I mean, for about 3 centuries,
mm-hmm.
you will give Al Qadr Billah the right to ban kalam because there were a lot of quarrels, a lot of problems, social problems, etc. Very huge agony among the fuqaha.
Mm.
Uh, in
So
in
he preferred the social stability rather versus the intellectual debates because they were causing so much social
That's
unrest
right.
essentially.
They didn't follow the right track of Islam. They went too much. They were too much in argumentation and free thinking.
Mm,
Okay,
mm,
you are a free thinker. Islam doesn't prevent you from thinking, but you should not deform the clearest Islamic rules.
yeah,
And these rules were given by the Quran.
yeah,
And when you consider the Quran temporal, for example, it's a
mm,
problem.
yeah,
But again, this was a tragedy for Kalam and Mutakallimun because people were prevented from acquiring any book of Kalam.
oh,
The books of Kalam were burnt.
mm,
And if the police find a book of Kalam in your possession or a possession of anybody at that time, you will be jailed or will be whipped actually.
wow, yeah, very
Yes,
aggressive.
yes,
Mm,
lashes, 20 or
mm,
40 lashes, I don't know at that time.
mm,
And that is why we lost the great legacy
yeah,
of Kalam. But thank God that some of the mutakallimuns or some of the people who had in possession the books of Kalam, they put it under different titles. They write on the cover a different title. For example, the book of Tadhkira.
uh-huh.
There are many Tadhkira books. Maybe
Yes,
Tadhkira means the after death,
yes, yes,
afterlife.
yes,
Tadhkira, Jannat, Jahim, uh,
yes,
etc. The hell
mm-hmm.
and the heavens
Yeah,
is also Tadhkira. So
yes, absolutely.
Tadhkira were used as title for some of the valuable Kalam books, especially
Amazing.
some books of Daqiq Al Kalam. And
Uh-huh.
that is how we now can talk accurately about Daqiq Al Kalam and the Islamic views in topics of natural philosophy so accurately because we have authentic contributions of the mutakallimun. It is not interpretations of their ideas. It is the exact wording that they have written.
Yeah. Wow,
Anyway,
great.
since that time, Kalam, actually, you can say, has gone into completely out of the scene. And now we are looking to reform Kalam. Reforming Kalam, to reform Kalam, there have been several attempts in the last 2 centuries, by the way, in the 20th century, in the second half of the 19th century,
Hmm.
and during the 20th century, there have been several attempts to reform Kalam as Muslim thinkers in our modern age recognize the need for that. Unfortunately, none of the attempts showed success till now. Reason is, as far as I can see, one, stubbornness of Islamic society against Kalam. Second, ignorance in respect of the use and application of modern Kalam. Even when I deliver some lectures, or some talks here and there, people start asking, what is the need for Kalam? What is the application of Kalam? What is the usefulness of Kalam? There is nothing. Kalam is Kalam. It is of no use.
It is just like its name. It's just words. It's
Word.
no application.
They think it is just.
They think that, yeah.
The other reason is difficulty to deal with the original Arabic text. The Arabic text in Kalam is very difficult. The Muhammad Abd al-Jabiri, who is a Moroccan thinker, he died past years ago. He says Arabic played in Kalam the role of mathematics, which is played in physics, in contemporary physics.
Yeah. So even as you were explained in the last episode, some of the arguments of Kalam were primarily rhetoric arguments, which primarily uses language.
It's lingual.
Language. Yeah, it's lingual.
Because language is not a communication means only. It is a way of thinking.
Yes.
It's a program of thinking. Arabic language is the best example. And I hope Chomsky can talk about this one day if he has time left. Now Chomsky, for example.
Yeah.
But there is also Fadl al-Samarrai, for example, can talk about this. He's a great Arabic scholar.
Maybe you should interview him one day.
I hope so.
Inshallah.
Fadl al-Samarrai, yes, he's in the United Arab Emirates. The fourth reason is no academic institute is established to deal with this type of work systematically. No academic institutes.
Okay.
And no funding is given to such a project. In the last 4 or 5 years, there were organization or called Kalam Research and Media, which was funded by the John Templeton Foundation. But unfortunately, the management of this Kalam Research and Media missed the point. They didn't achieve the goals for which they were funded with large amount of money. I think they were funded with something like $6 million or more dollars.
Wow.
Over the period of 3 or 4 years. But they didn't manage the right thing. I contributed to this endeavor, to this program, several writing, and I thank them for publishing my book, God, Nature, and the Cause. But many other people have also contributed their manuscript, but they were not published.
I see.
Yeah. So we have a problem there. If we have to revive Kalam, we need to make it a mainstream academic studies. And we have many questions, many problems. I have myself a full-fledged systematic approach to initiate serious academic studies and applications and programs relating contemporary physics and formalizing it in the philosophical context through Kalam and Daqiq Al Kalam, through Daqiq. But if you ask me, what about Jalil Al Kalam? Oh, Jalil Al Kalam needs complete reform. And
Yeah.
as I will show later, my program goes on using or reforming Daqiq Al Kalam first, which is much easier, especially that I am a physicist. And then afterwards, one can go to Jalil Al Kalam and reform Jalil Al Kalam or rebuild completely Jalil Al Kalam on the basis of the new Daqiq Al Kalam. And this needs the work of maybe hundreds of scholars, hundreds of Ph.D. and MSc thesis being done, and the programs and the clerics discussing Jalil Al Kalam. It's not my job. It's not my job. I cannot do that. I will lay the foundation maybe for that. The time left for me in this life, but other people can continue certainly.
Yeah. So that was about the reforming Kalam.
Yes, and by this, yes, I would end my talk today, because this is the most important subject. Reforming Kalam is the most important item we need to do during these years, especially we are, as you know, we maybe at the lowest point
in our history.
In our history, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you very much, Dr. Basil, for this interesting second episode of our series, Islam and Natural Philosophy. What are we going to be talking about next week, Dr. Basil?
Yeah, I will take now, I will go into the principles of Daqiq Al Kalam, the 5 principles of Daqiq Al Kalam.
Excellent.
How I got them, how I could recognize these 5 principles, with lots of quotations from the original Mutakallimun and the original writings, books of the Mutakallimun. And then one by one, I'll go through atomism, temporality, the recreation principle, the indeterminism of the world, and the space-time integrity. So the audience will see something really new, never
Inshallah.
heard of it.
Inshallah. Looking forward to it, Dr. Basil. So everybody, we thank Dr. Basil for this great episode and looking forward for the upcoming one. So see you in the after show and see you next week. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Basil. Assalamu alaikum.